So one of the most important activities of the AFL-CIO in recent years has been the development of coalitions and alliances with community organizations on issues such as low-wage work, right now immigration reform, and job creation generally. So Lara is the leader of one of those community organizations. She's a co-chair of the board of the Jobs with Justice American Rights at Work organization. She is also the director of Missouri Jobs with Justice Coalition. And that's a coalition of nearly 100 organizations committed to building statewide power for workers' rights and economic policy issues. She's been involved in a number of campaigns in this area, things like increase to the minimum wage, defending affirmative action, supporting workers' organizing unions, and generally bargaining for better lives at work. So Laura today will talk about the work of Jobs with Justice. We'll have some time for questions. Laura will talk for about 20 minutes. And while I'm up here, let me plug the listening session that the AFL-CIO is going to be holding today starting at 4:45 in the Missouri Middle Room. The AFL-CIO has launched a open and inclusive process in which we're talking to various constituency groups about what labor needs to do to change, to appeal to non-union workers, young workers, immigrants, and so on. And what we learn at these sessions is going to be filtered to the AFL-CIO convention in September. So there's a leaflet out there about this session, and I hope that you all can join us. So let's hear from Lara Granish. Lara?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dan, for having me here this morning. I'm very excited to be here in a room of such thoughtful people. I know that here in St. Louis, some of the most dedicated and thoughtful colleagues I have are involved in LIRA. And I'm excited to start my day in a room filled with folks finding ways for labor, management, government, and academics and advocates to work together for an economy that benefits everyone. Can folks hear me all right? Yeah. Great. Terrific. So this morning, as Dan mentioned, I'm here to talk with you about the role of community labor partnerships in building this economy that works well for all of us. In my introduction, he discussed my role in the national organization, Jobs with Justice, American Rights at Work. I'll also be grounding my remarks here today in the experience of organizing right here on the ground in Missouri for workers' rights issues and more just economic policies. In a room filled with such talented people, I don't intend to carry on very long up here. I'm going to share some ideas and experiences to ground us, and then I'd actually really value beginning a conversation with the folks here in the room. So drink that coffee and jot down a few ideas while I'm talking, because I really want to hear from you in a few minutes here. For those of you who don't know Jobs with Justice, American Rights at Work, we are actually a national network of local coalitions that bring together labor unions, faith groups, community organizations, and student activists to fight for working people. We exist in 46 cities, including St. Louis, where you are right now, and in 24 states across the country. Here in St. Louis, we're actually part of a statewide Missouri Jobs with Justice organization. We are there for one another's fights, and we unite to take on struggles that none of us could win alone. This is the only way we can win, we believe, if we stand together. For 25 years, Jobs with Justice, the organization, built these long-term formal coalitions of organizations and individuals. These lasting relationships built the power we needed to win real changes in the lives of working families and communities. Our national office, and I want to make sure we see Aaron Johansson and Michael Wasser here from the National Office of Jobs with Justice, American Rights at Work. Our national office helps us add up to win the kind of national policy gains that I know you've been discussing and we'll be discussing here this weekend. I come out of Jobs with Justice. I've been working with the organization here on the ground, was part of founding the St. Louis Jobs with Justice Coalition 12 years ago, 13 years ago now. And I see some familiar faces around from that time here in the room. But last year, Jobs with Justice merged with American Rights at Work. Are there folks here that have been involved in the research or reading the research of American Rights at Work nationally? I see a lot of nodding heads, that's terrific. So through that merger, the new organization unites the grassroots power and muscle of these local jobs with justice coalitions with the strategic impact we have through the research, the reports, the investigations, and the kind of communications capacity to stimulate public debate around workers' rights issues throughout the country. So I'm very excited about the kind of strategic breadth our new national organization brings together. In this work over the last 25 years nationally and a little over a dozen years locally, we have found some core principles around our organizing for workers' rights that I want to put forward for discussion today. One core principle we found is this power of building permanent coalitions, right? I think many of us have been part of like a coalition that came together around one issue or to pass one bill. But when we actually build a long-term sustained coalition like a local jobs with justice coalition, we are able to knit together very powerful relationships that allow us to do something different, some different things. In that space, labor and community allies within the state can develop a shared analysis, first of all, around the problems facing our community, right? And in that shared analysis, we can come up with smarter work to do together. Also, in that space, we are able to build the trusting relationships that allow us to have the difficult conversations around issues and challenges that often divide us. In working people's issues here in St. Louis, we've been able to have the kind of difficult conversations around immigration policy that have often divided the friends of working people. Difficult conversations around issues of police accountability here locally that had for years divided working people. By having a long-term coalition, we've been able to work through those things and continue to work together even when we have tension on one or another point. Also, I want to talk about, so in these permanent coalitions, Jobs with Justice is also a multi-issue coalition. Workers have multiple identities, right? You're not just a nurse. You're also a nurse in a neighborhood. You're a nurse that goes to a certain congregation, right? You're a nurse with a kid on a campus. Through these we can actually tap the power of who working people are in their communities and their congregations on campuses in order to unite a base that brings together allies that support the issues we're trying to move. So in our permanent multi-issue coalitions, we're not just a letterhead coalition at Jobs with Justice, we're a coalition that takes action together. We are committed to mobilization. We engage rank and file activists in solidarity activities and direct action. Talking and research is one powerful way we come together, but when people take the streets together, they often have transformative experiences that really deepen their commitment to the hard work it takes to win campaigns for workers' rights. The fourth key thing is reciprocity. So often, I think, Dan and I talked about this, the labor movement has come to the community when it was in crisis, but not been able to be there when the community needed them. There's a tough history of that in many communities. Through a permanent, long-term multi-issue coalition, we are able to have the networks in place that allow for reciprocity. In that reciprocity, the community is able to also see why investing in a powerful labor movement benefits all working people, right? They really see that in real life. I'm gonna talk about a little bit how that's looked in Missouri, and how the role of the community organizing in Missouri has been able to sustain worker organizing campaigns and worker justice fights. There are really two major reasons why it's critical for worker groups to involve community allies. One has been that these community allies are able to help neutralize or are able to help bring an employer into the fold on the issues that face their workers. The second is that community allies really provide support to the workers, both the leaders who have committed to an organizing campaign and to those who are sort of undecided about taking a risk to organize. The role of community allies is really to move a worker justice fight from an issue between an an employer and a worker to an issue that faces the whole community. One such campaign was here in St. Louis. We had a worker at a Department of Mental Health facility here in St. Louis, and she was actually terminated by the state for failing to, here's what had happened. She had actually witnessed an incident where a co-worker improperly restrained a patient. She was upset by this, reported it to her supervisor. Saw nothing happen after a few days, reported it a second time to that supervisor, then up the chain to the director of nursing. After a couple of weeks of not seeing anything happening, she was actually in bargaining with the state and reported directly to the director of the Department of Mental Health at the bargaining table. She was part of the bargaining team. After reporting it, she was terminated the next week for failing to report abuse in a timely manner, ironically. So this was a very alarming development, not just for that worker and her family, not just for her union, but actually for a community of mental health activists here in the state, for a community of people who want to make sure that in our mental health safety net, workers are in a position to address issues of patient care. What we also found out, she came then to Jobs with Justice, and her union came to Jobs with Justice and engaged our Workers' Rights Board. I don't know, has anyone here been involved in a Jobs with Justice Workers' Rights Board? I see a couple of hands and nods. In our permanent coalitions, we have a coalition of organizations, but we also organize what's called Workers' Rights Boards. And many of you maybe, it's a place for many academics to get involved at the local level. The Workers' Rights Boards are panels of sort of opinion leaders in the community. So academics, clergy, elected officials, other community leaders that sort of stand witness when there are incidents of worker injustice in the community. So they might hold a public hearing. In this case, they actually held a private investigatory hearing into the incident. They might write letters to an employer. They might do delegations to an elected official or to management to sort of shine a light on what's happening with workers in a community. Workers' rights boards are able to then create a sort of de facto floor under what is tolerated in the community. So often the wheels of justice grind slowly around the National Labor Relations Act, as many may know. So these community boards are often able to create urgency where we need it. In this case, that's exactly what we needed. We needed some urgency around this incident because the complaints, the grievances dragged on and on for this worker. In the investigation that the Workers' Rights Board pulled together, they actually found not only had there been this sort of incident around reporting patient abuse, but this caregiver had also filed 30 grievances related to violations of patient staffing ratios in the facility over the last year. So she had been a very consistent advocate and a real sort of pain to the system for being that kind of patient advocate. On the Workers' Rights Board shined a light on that, engaged many in the community around that facility and in the mental health community, began talking to elected officials, and finally, on the 1-year anniversary of her dismissal, with TV cameras behind us, delivered a birthday cake with the case number to the Personnel Advisory Board of the state that was handling this grievance. And at that hearing, the Personnel Advisory Board kind of cracked the door and stuck the finding out the door, and flipped to the last page and saw that she actually was going to be fully reinstated with full back pay for that year of work. That is something that would never have happened. That's right. It's the kind of thing that doesn't happen without making this an issue that isn't just about Frida and her employer, but the whole community, right? And lest we underestimate the importance of that urgency, that worker actually took that back pay check to the bank to get her house out of foreclosure. She'd gone a year without wages. So it's very, very important, this work we do, taking an issue to the broader community. So that's how we kind of are able to move an employer to understand that the worker's interest is the community interest. In terms of also just supporting the worker themselves when they're undertaking an effort to improve their lives. I actually want to tell a story about the fast food strikes that are happening around the country. So in early May, workers here in St. Louis, in 30 different restaurants, over 100 workers, took action and went on strike for one day in support of better wages and the right to form a union at their job. And so the community was sort of there with them in the streets that day, but in a less public but still very powerful way, they were also with them the day after. In every single one of these restaurants, a delegation of clergy, a unionist, and a union organizer from that union walked workers back to work after their strike. So they, gathered in the outside, all the workers together who had gone out, and then walked in and spoke with the management and said, we know that Jennifer and Rasheen at Jimmy John's took action yesterday. We are with the community, we are here with them. This was a legal action, and we are sure that you're going to be a responsible employer and there will be no retaliation for this legal action standing up for their rights. And no worker has been fired for taking action because of that community participation there. No worker has seen any retaliation. That was a really transformative experience for those workers that took the risk, for the workers that watched them get walked back with clergy next to them. But it was also a really transformational experience for the people, the community allies that did that with them. I'm actually going to read you an excerpt from an email from Father Steve Robeson. I have his permission to read it. Who emailed us after he walked a worker back to Little Caesars in South St. Louis County. So he said, you may already have heard from Hope, John, or Dee, our brave striking worker, that Dee's walk back into work at the Little Caesars in Maryland Heights happened very smoothly and without incident. We did our walk back at 4 p.m. and Dee signed right into work. Dee's fellow striker, Carla, was there. The good outcome I can testify to is the looks of empowerment on Carla's and Dee's and the other co-workers' faces as we stood three across, the church, me, the organizer, Hope, and the union voice, John's the organizer for the meat cutters, and those workers who got to see that show of power in their corner. They definitely knew we weren't just three people at the counter ordering pizza. Knowledge is also good power, and Hope's excellent advice on how they should talk to their manager next to support what they had achieved was clearly empowering these young workers. We could see as they listened to Hope, nodding their heads, that they got it and they knew how to take care of themselves. It was my privilege to be a part of this. I will definitely be preaching on those facial expressions of empowered young workers feeling solidarity with their human and faith community. Please call on me again. This is why Jobs with Justice is not just a letterhead coalition. When we take even these small actions together, it transforms us in a way that gives us the strength to take on the hard issues we have to struggle with to build an economy that benefits us all. In closing, I'm going to share just two key lessons about what makes those successful fights successful in labor-community partnership, okay? The first lesson is that when we engage community allies in a campaign, that engagement really needs to be strategic. For it to be strategic, it needs to start early. For example, we often get a 911 call when workers are in crisis after there's been sort of months of tension and intimidation, and finally things are at a crisis point, so we just have to pile on. That's not actually the most strategic time to be engaging the community. The sooner that we are engaged, the more thoughtful and intentional we can be about the community allies, the more strategic their impact can be on the campaign. Also, when we engage community allies, they don't just want to be part of a series of tactics. Community allies are very busy people, as everyone are busy people, and they want to know that their time is being used strategically and worthwhile. Our community allies aren't looking to drive the strategy in any campaign, but they do want to know how they fit into a path to victory. And so understanding the strategy behind a campaign and how the community allies are bringing something unique and powerful is is really a part of making sure that we have the kind of transformative experience that Father Steve had at Little Caesars. The second lesson is that when we are engaging the community, it is really important and powerful to utilize long-term coalitions like Jobs with Justice, and there are many others perhaps in your community. That way we don't have to reinvent the wheel each time we are engaging the community in a campaign. We can actually move through existing relationships and infrastructure. And by using these long-term coalitions, we also really respect that commitment to reciprocity. That when a community ally is engaging in a fight through a long-term coalition, they understand that in that space, they're going to be able to ask and get back later. They're actually one of my early colleagues in this work is John Ryan, who at the time was the head of the Cleveland AFL-CIO. He's now on the staff of Sherrod Brown. But when he was head of the Cleveland AFL-CIO and also the labor co-chair of Cleveland Jobs of Justice, he used to say, the AFL-CIO is where we come together as a labor movement, right? But at Jobs of Justice, the labor movement can really share a table with our allies and sit in partnership with our allies. While they may have sort of a solidarity committee, and he did in his Cleveland AFL-CIO, where he interacts with community allies, a long-term coalition like Jobs of Justice is a truly shared space. So that's a very unique and important contribution. So I actually think I'll wrap up there and see if there are folks in the room with comments or questions or your own stories to share. I would actually love to hear the experiences in the room that you have working in labor community partnerships, or any of the challenges that you may wonder about or encounter with labor community partnerships as well. And we have a mic. Well, you're going to speak from where you are. There's also Dan. Do you have a microphone there? Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, Lara. So we have a microphone here. Any comments or questions for Lara? You can come up here. I think you can probably shout them out too.
Yes.
I'd be interested to know what rule of decision, if that's one way to put it, you use when an event or a problem comes to you, and you have to decide, is this for us, and can it be effective, versus better let this one lie?
That's good. So Paul asked, how do we make a decision about when an issue comes to us, whether we take it on or not, right? So we actually have a very clear decision-making process. I'll speak for Missouri Jobs of Justice. I'm actually not sure how each individual coalition does this. We're actually a very bottom-up network, so people may handle it differently. But here in Missouri, we have a very clear process. So process-wise, people fill out what's called a solidarity plan. And so they really sit down and we kind of pull together a little brain trust and say, hey, we ask a pretty clear set of questions. Like, one, is this campaign, so here's some of the factors we take into account. Is this winnable, right? Is this a fight that is at a place where we can really still have impact? Or is it even set up as something that will have impact? And sometimes it isn't, the win is broadly defined, right? Sometimes even though we don't win the battle, we build something important in the fight. And so we are very clear about what we're trying to accomplish by taking something on. Is there something clear and unique that our Jobs with Justice chapter, our community labor partnership can bring, right? And what is that? Are there ways that in addition to winning for these workers, we're able to build for the long haul as Jobs with Justice? The third thing we consider. So that might look like when we are helping the operating engineers at St. Louis University, we're also, I see my brother Eric Michigan in the back, so I'm gonna call out his local. We're working with their workers at St. Louis University. It also gives us an opportunity to engage student groups there that we've been meaning to try to connect with and then can become part of the coalition. So in that process, how we assess whether to take it on, but it's also how we plan to take it on in the most powerful possible way from the front end. We also ask, what is the follow-up? Is actually the fourth question. It's too often like, come have us put a bunch of bodies in a big rally, and then what's going to happen after the big rally? So we really have that discussion on the front end. What's the follow-up? What is the ongoing strategy, and how is this really a part of that? Is that helpful?
So my question sort of piggybacks on that. So suppose there's some success and there's the possibility of an organizing drive emerging from what was sort of an individual or smaller incident. What's the relationship between what you're doing and the union or unions that eventually are going to try and organize? And how does particularly the question of which union organizes gets sorted out? I realize this could get really complicated and messy, but in general, what's essentially the connection between what you're doing and potentially eventual organizing, formal organizing?
Sure. So I'm going to repeat questions just in case the rest of them can't hear. So talking about when we're doing some of these campaigns, often a set of workers may emerge, right, who are fighting for justice around a certain issue that may then have the possibility of organizing a union. And then how do you also, if that's the case, figure out, navigate the politics of which union? I have to say here in Missouri, so I'm truly just going to speak from the experience in Missouri, I wish we had the problem of too many unions fighting to organize workers that emerge. That hasn't truly been a problem on the ground. We have, one way that has happened though is actually Jobs with Justice in Missouri was part of a coalition statewide that passed an increase in the minimum wage in 2006. They actually, our increase in the minimum wage is a national model. It was actually lifted up by the White House a couple weeks ago. We have a cost of living adjustment already on our minimum wage. Now, because the federal went up, it kind of caught up to our 2006 increase, but we're climbing with the cost of living right now. But when that passed in 2006, it passed overwhelmingly. And this is a state where elections are won by 1 or 2 points all the time, right? It's also a state where people think of like blobs of blue over St. Louis and Kansas City, and then the sea of red in between. But that minimum wage increase in 2006 passed by 76%, and it passed in every single county by 16 points or more. So it was a really strong consensus win. In spite of that, every year after it, there was an attack in the legislature on that victory, an attempt to repeal it in one form or another, and especially one important piece of that 2006 increase is that we raised the tipped employee minimum wage. As many people may know, it is $2.13 federally, has been $2.13 for I don't know how long, over a decade, 15 years at least. So in Missouri, your tipped employee minimum wage is 50% of the current minimum wage. It's indexed just like the full minimum wage. So there has been attacks every year, especially by the Restaurant Association on that victory. Through years of work protecting that, we actually built a base of servers statewide. And we've had a very cooperative relationship, particularly with Unite Here, around those workers. It has not surfaced an organizing campaign that has been taken on in one, but there really is support by the more informal support by the union to kind of support the organizing in that workforce, do some leadership development in that workforce. And in fact, many of those have gone on, some of those have gone on to be organizers for that union in other places. But I beg for people fighting over to organize workers in Missouri. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so my question feeds off two things you said. First of all, I'm interested in the fast food strikes. But then the question is it winnable, and what is the long-term strategy?
I think those are great questions, and I think I cannot answer those questions decisively. Long-term is the important piece, though. I mean, I know here, working very closely with the workers in St. Louis, the whole community side is actually being run out of Jobs with Justice here in St. Louis, and now in Kansas City as well. The only state with, I will say, I beg for people to organize workers, but the only state with 2 cities doing the fast food organizing right now. It is going to be a long-term piece, and we're going to have to make the road by walking, as they say. We're needing to figure out what getting these workers in motion can win. So there's been some small wins, shop by shop, but the big picture is clearly still emerging.
Comment and a question. I've noticed in particular you mentioned the word reciprocity, which you used 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
Which is being taught in a lot of schools that teach the employment relationship, basically. It's reciprocity for behavioral scientists in exchange for labor economists. My question, to follow us up a little bit on some of the others, who would be your competitors for a disenfranchised worker of the type you described in your incident? And what I'm thinking of in particular is plaintiffs' attorneys as an alternative source for a disenfranchised employee. In your Missouri experience, is the bar a competitor of yours? What's the experience?
That's a very good question. Actually, I would call them an ally, not a competitor. We actually we have a very good relationship with the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys and the Worker Injury Lawyers Guild, and have worked well with those attorneys who understand the sort of complementary strategies. Actually, sometimes labor attorneys as well will say some of our best kind of board members and workers' rights board members and labor attorneys who are grinding through this exhausting NLRB process and say, go to Jobs with Justice and try to get this done. This is going to take years. Maybe you can get some heat under this and resolve things offline. So I would say there's definitely allies for where we can see people get justice through that system. We really want them to. And actually, one other thing on that point, we've also worked closely with them to defend the right to access to the judiciary for workers on a lot of issues, because they do keep trying to limit that.
Are there any methods to sort of share best practices? If something works well in Missouri, it might work in Illinois or California?
Well, so I think some key best practices are this, having these shared spaces among allies so that it's not just kind of one group convening and running a space for this issue, one group over here running for this issue. Having this place where you're really able to negotiate the reciprocity, really able to have shared analysis and thinking around the strategy is a real best practice. Also, by having that long-term space, you're able to build a base for the long haul. I mean, through each of these episodic fights, we're sort of maniacal and type A about our data management. So we're able to really see on these minimum wage fights, the people who came out in 2007, and we can call on them again in 2009 and in 2013 to increase the minimum wage again. Making sure that each fight builds on the next. We don't have any kind of capacity to spare, so that's really important.
Yeah, on that very issue, in terms of capacity, internally in Missouri, how do you decide what your priorities are if you have more than one thing happening at the same time, in terms of resource allocation?
Sure. How do we decide our priorities for resource allocation with so much going on? That is a very, very good question. We do have things like a strategic plan that help us pick which issues we can have impact on, or which issues we're going to focus on. So there's that. We've got sort of a vision about what's the impact we're trying to make, and so then what are the battles that move us towards that. We also, we are part of a broader movement, so where there are things where someone else is better positioned to take it on, we work to help them provide leadership and then just kind of give more tactical support. So we think about that. But we also think about where is our energy most impactful, and that it builds us for the long haul. So we have in Missouri 10.5 staff people right now statewide. And we really think about how we deploy, and then we have leadership bodies in St. Louis and Kansas City and a state board of leaders. And then, I think over 17,000 people who've taken the Jobs with Justice pledge. I'll be there 5 times a year for someone else's fight, as well as my own, because enough of us are there, we all start winning. So thinking about turning people out for something that they can win, and they can have a really powerful experience being part of that victory. And also where the stakes are high. So over the last year, we've actually spent a lot of energy fighting attacks on collective bargaining rights in the state legislature, because right now we're not a right-to-work state. If we became a right-to-work state, that would be very devastating for the long haul. So that would be another thing to kind of amplify the importance of something.
Yes, I currently subscribe to the Jobs and Justice in Nashville. I get emails regularly. I share it with people in my local and everyone else who wants to be on my email list and NFL.net. I'd like you to briefly discuss the advantages of subscribing to these emails. We
Sure, sure. Why you would subscribe to your, and you're talking about local, well, I would say both the local and the national Jobs with Justice communications are very helpful. So locally, the value of really being on the email list and kind of in the loop is that you really find these opportunities where literally showing up for an hour somewhere can really, truly make a difference in someone's life and working people's lives. And so it is a way to really be a part of a movement in a way that is strategic and a good use of your time and energy, I hope, as well. Nationally, we've got a couple of really important listservs as well that I think can be valuable to people in the Lara network. I might ask Aaron or Michael, do you want to quickly speak to the national listservs available?
Yeah, well, there will soon be one.
Okay.
We finished the merger. Well, the merger's done, but there will soon be one listserv with American Rights and Worker Jobs with Justice. Mm-hmm. So those are the national campaigns that we're moving. Walmart is a big campaign, Caring Across Generations, healthcare workers. And so that's where, people's involvement can be really effective. We've had a big IKEA win last year, right? Largely because of people on the listserv.
Okay. So there's one listserv that you can hear about national campaigns as well. So she spoke of a big win we had at IKEA last year that really tapped the power of online activism. We also have a daily clips list, right, that can also give people a broad overview of the press coverage on issues relating to workers' rights and economic policy. That is another good listserv.
And the Labor Research Action Network.
The Labor Research, and actually, before we go, do you want to step up here and talk about that in this room? Actually, I think
yeah.
I'm going to get Aaron up here to pinch it.
Yeah, so at Jobs with Justice, we host the Labor Research Action Network, which was formed several years ago now. Paul Clark, Dan Marshall, a bunch of you in the room have all been really active in moving this along. The idea is it's a space where scholars and practitioners can really come together around research, collaboration, and other forms of collaboration. And so if you're interested in becoming part of the LRAN network, you just email me. It's on the website, AmericanRightsAtWork.org. And we actually have a new LRAN network, lrannetwork.org as well. And we have a conference coming up in DC in a couple of weeks too, so there's information there on the website.
It's a great national resource. All right.
Anyone else? Okay, it's almost 8 o'clock for our next round of workshops, so let's thank Lara again.
Thank you all.
And thanks for coming.